And hello, everybody. Welcome to Narrative Tuesdays. It's Countdown Tuesdays, my favorite Tuesday of the week, in fact. My favorite day of the week. Hi, Noel. How are you? It's good to see you again.
Good to see you, Zev. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here, and what a full show we have. I'm going to get into Roger Stone later on in a way that many people did not know about Roger Stone, especially around January the 6th. What exactly was he doing on January the 6th, and also what he was doing on January the 5th? You know, there was a report that came out of the Congress today that many people have panned, not because it's wrong. It's an absolutely accurate reflection of some parts of what happened on January the 6th, but there's no attribution to any of the responsible parties like Roger Stone, Alex Jones, and maybe even your old friend Donald Trump. So we'll try to remedy that in the next hour as we take a look at the case against Roger Stone and what he was doing during that period of time. That's coming up in about 20 minutes or so. But let's do the big stories of the day, and we'll start off with story number 4. This is a story you're intimately familiar with. It's a story about a woman who has sued Donald Trump, first for rape and then secondarily for defamation, right? Tell us a little bit more about E. Jean Carroll and why the Justice Department has made this strange move.
Well, E. Jean Carroll, first of all, is a hero. She's an incredibly strong woman. I believe her 100%. Anybody who knows Donald Trump and is familiar with her case and knows that he was guilty. You know, I read her piece in New York Magazine when it came out, and I'm like, that's Donald Trump. You know, it's not just the description of what he did to her. He raped her in a dressing room at Bergdorf and Goodman. But before then, they were walking around the lobby, and he was like, they had met at cocktail parties. She was a famous woman. You know, to give you an insight into Trump's personality, she knew him, he knew her, she was famous, and he felt like he could get away with sexual assault on this person in the busiest store in Manhattan, you know, in one of the busiest department stores in the world. That shows you his character. And when she talked about her experience, she recounted it. They were picking out scarves. He was like, hey, help me pick out a scarf for my secretary or whatever. And she'd say, oh, how about this one? And he'd be like, no, not that one. That's stupid. And if you know Trump, that's his personality. He's always like a contrarian, his oppositional defiance disorder. So even the clues before leading up to the assault were like, yep, that's completely Trump, right? So he assaulted her. She told her friends about it. She saved some of the DNA. That's why she's suing him to get her DNA. When this story broke 2 years ago, this month, actually, Trump denied it. He was asked about it. He was president of the United States. He was asked about it on the White House lawn, and he disparaged her. He was like, no, I didn't do it. And look at her. She's not my type anyway, which is a pretty awkward defense, right? Like a pretty disgusting defense. Not like, no, I would never rape somebody. I'm not that kind of human being. It was like, nah, she's not my type. But so he clearly did it, in my opinion, right? So Robbie Kaplan is her lawyer, a brilliant lawyer, and they launched a defamation case against him because he disparaged her and said she was lying, you know, without consenting to their case, without submitting his DNA and proving that she was lying, which he could do in a court of law. He just decided to disparage her in the media. You know, and he's a powerful person. He's the president of the United States at the time, right?
And he was doing that when he did that. It was in the press room at the White House, right? Is that correct?
I thought it was on the lawn.
Oh, it could be on the lawn.
He probably did it several times, right?
But right at the White House while doing his day job, I guess. Yeah,
bingo, in his official capacity, right? So that's where this case that was dismissed, or basically where the DOJ said they would continue to defend Trump. They're basically not doing it on behalf of Trump. They're doing it on behalf of the government in the fear that they'd be setting a precedent if they allowed the case to sort of go forward without their protections. And basically it boils down to federal employees can't be sued for libel in the course of doing their jobs. Right?
Just federal employees, or is it just the president?
Government. Okay. I think it was the government employees. I'm not a legal expert, obviously, but I think that's the legal precedent they're trying to protect, is that we have to protect government employees from lawsuits in the course of carrying out their official duties.
Even if they're lying, it makes no sense. I mean, if they're lying, why are we protecting them? They're breaking the rules anyhow.
Right. Exactly.
Right. So firstly, I think this has clearly happened. I mean, there's no he's not even really disputing it. He's sort of just pretending he's disputing it. It's like this typical denial that he does. Everything becomes a deflection and an insult to somebody else, but it's not. We know what he's like, and we know what he's been like with other women. There's maybe more than a dozen, I think, maybe even much more than a dozen women who've come forward with claims of assault against this man during his lifetime. Not while he was president, but at least before he was president. We all remember the famous Access Hollywood tape. I mean, we certainly know this is his thinking, this is his character. He was clearly responsible for this kind of behavior. And yet here's the DOJ with Merrick Garland now as the Attorney General, basically defending him. And this is going to hurt her case. This is going to hurt E.G. Carroll's case because she is not going to be able to go ahead with his defending her defamation suit.
Absolutely.
Is that accurate? So she's suing him, or he's suing her. He's suing her, right?
No, she was suing him
for defamation.
Robbie, for defamation,
Okay.
And they basically, the DOJ threw out their suit yesterday.
So it's basically dead on arrival because they're sitting there and saying, "Wow!"
Exactly.
So it's shocking. You know, as you were talking there about how it happened, I was reminded of this satire clip. I guess you can call it satire, when Donald Trump and Rudy Giuliani did when Rudy was mayor, where I think he was picking up one of them was in drag. I think Rudy was in drag, and Trump was picking out a perfume, I think, at a department store.
Yeah.
And they basically, he was pretending like he was hitting up on Giuliani, which sort of feels to me like maybe they were making fun of his MO. I mean, it might have happened before or after the E. Jean Carroll event, but it certainly feels like, this is something that Trump did.
It is something he did. Yeah. That is completely his MO. I'm glad you said that, Zev, because that's what you really need to think about. Bergdorf and Goodman is 3 blocks from his office, if that. From his building. It's 57th and 5th Avenue. 56th and 5th is where Trump Tower is. Bergdorf is just up the street. 59th, 60th Street office. It's gorgeous, right?
Yeah.
But think about a famous man walking from his, building, right? Or in a car or something. And the other thing is he definitely had security with him that day because Trump doesn't go anywhere alone. So there was a Keith Schiller or somebody like that standing either outside of that dressing room where he did this or meeting him downstairs and walking him home after the assault because Trump doesn't go anywhere without security since the 80s.
Unbelievable.
So that's the other part of this story is there was a lot of guys who knew what Trump was up to that protected him, right? But that was his stomping grounds. That's what he did. I have friends that he groomed when they were ice skating as girls on his rink, that later ended up with him and Epstein in his house. And they're not as strong as E. Jean Carroll today. They live broken lives. I know women that he's, assaulted that have never recovered. And it's 200 cases, Zeb. There's 200 credible instances. There's 6 cases. There's 200 accusations. People, there's 200 stories of sexual assault. And those are just the women that have come forward. I know stories that nobody's ever heard of. The first time I heard about him raping somebody was from a TV director, and it happened way before The Apprentice. So none of this stuff was a secret. He did it at the U.S. Open in his booth. And I used to work the U.S. Open. I was in the booth right next to him. Like the guy, any place publicly was part of his thing. He assaulted a woman on an airplane sitting next to him in a seat in first class. The guy is a sexual predator. Everybody knows it. But for one reason or another, he's always protected and always gotten away with it up into this latest case where now the DOJ and Merrick Garland is like, yep, we're going to side with Trump.
Well, I mean, still protecting him. It seems like they're still protecting him. I mean, I know there are reasons for doing this. I know they're trying to protect federal employees from being prosecuted and, maybe they need those protections, but the optics are too terrible to imagine. I mean, in this particular case, it's just maybe they should have just stomached the precedent setting and fought it later on. But, this president has done so many criminal things, both on his way to the White House and in the White House. And for the first major opportunity for the DOJ to do something to actually, show their stripes, if you were, they're not doing it. They're basically backing him. So even if there might be good legal reasoning for all of this, it strikes me as being, just a bad decision, just a bad call for optically. And maybe they need to think about the optics. It also makes me think that this is becoming a reality. The sort of the Merrick Garland buyer's remorse, which is story number 3 on our show tonight. I mean, boy, he is where is Sally Yates is the question that's on my mind. I mean, it's sort of like,
I'm with you.
is she, can we still call her in? Because this isn't working out. You know, it's like, sorry, Merrick, but we're not seeing eye to eye here. We were expecting something completely different. And we're getting, you know, stonewalling, we're getting Bill Barr defenses, we're getting stealing phone records from journalists, we're getting this defense of Donald Trump in a rape case. Can we return you and get Sally Yates? Because I don't like what we're seeing.
I know. And Mitch McConnell's probably like, man, I should have confirmed. I should have let this guy go to the Supreme Court. Right. I didn't know he would be like this. You know, Mitch was like, what was I thinking? This guy's the greatest, you know? And I think a lot of people, and there was a few people who called this, you know, Ely Mistel, I always say his name wrong, was talking about this.
Yes.
And, you know, he's an establishment guy. You know, he's part of the same system that has always protected men like Donald Trump and institutional things. You know, Bill Barr was the same guy. You know, remember when Bill Barr, everybody was like, well, Bill Barr is going to be a reasoning factor on Trump. You know, he's an institutionalist. You know, no, he's not. He's the guy who helped cover up El Mozote and the Iran-Contra affair, you know,
and then some.
Right. Just a few, you know, and Merrick Garland is helping defend Barr, like you said, and Barr's legacy and making sure we don't see his memo, which was clearly obstruction of justice on behalf of the most corrupt president in the history of the United States. It should honestly scare people. And Biden is probably, and Biden's probably thinking about it, you know, because you know.
Well, here's what the thing that really stuck when. Go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, I was just going to say this. Biden's probably getting a sense that this is not going to be good for his legacy. You know, it's like,
right. And he swore up and down he was going to have an independent DOJ, and now he's stuck with this guy. You know, the first time I got a little bit of a warning sign around Merrick Garland was when Louis Freeh, the former FBI director under Giuliani, worked with Giuliani at least. I don't know who he was under presidentially, but Freeh endorsed Merrick Garland in an official letter. And Freeh is not a clean dude, in my opinion. You know, he comes from the school of FBI directors that is he's certainly not objective in their justice. And so when I saw that, I was like, oh God, Merrick Garland is getting supported by Freeh. That's not a good look. But you know, we've let him hang around there for a couple of months now, and it's not looking like he's returning the Justice Department to the kind of Justice Department that we were expecting. He might be returning it to a Justice Department of the 1950s or 60s, but it's not, not the kind of Justice Department we maybe saw under Barack Obama.
Absolutely. And he hasn't given a press conference either. He hasn't given a press conference on January 6th.
Yeah.
Hey, I did do one. I stand corrected. That.
I think he did. But he hasn't address at least. He gave it like a speech once, I think, on his first day or something like that. But I don't think he's done a full press conference. I don't think he's taken questions about the big legal issues in front of him.
My point exactly. He hasn't given us a press briefing on January 6th. Our democracy was attacked. You're in charge of the investigation. Tell us what's going on. Congress won't let us investigate. Senate won't let us investigate. You're the attorney general. You know, we read about in the paper that the FBI arrests 400 guys that worked at Pep Boys up in New York and West Virginia. Tell us who's behind this thing. Tell us what the Justice Department is doing to make sure it doesn't happen. And the guy's missing in action. He's obviously working because he's making these decisions, but he's not, like you said, he's not an Obama era kind of friendly, let's get out there and be transparent. He's representing the old guard of it's none of your damn business what I'm doing.
I mean, with him and Chris Wray at the FBI, it's getting really troubling for me because we don't know what's going on on January the 6th, and we don't know what's going on with the coronavirus investigation, and still, you know, we don't have the Mueller unredacted volumes. I mean, it's just, to me, it's the same thing continuing. It seems like an endless cover-up. Yes, Rudy Giuliani is being investigated, but is he ever going to get indicted? No, probably not. Right. I mean, none of these things are actually, it's the same thing over and over again. And they can keep punting this down the line a little bit, but, you know, it's going to start getting people really upset because there is now a credible criminal that was the president of the United States for 4 years that, you know, did enormous damage to this country, stole a lot of money, along with the other things, the rape and all these other things that he's done. And yet here we are not doing anything about it, really. We're going to take all these January the 6th insurrectionists and throw them behind bars for a while, make examples of them and say, hey, those are the guys responsible. And those aren't entirely the guys responsible. They might have been the people that broke into the Capitol, But the people whose orders they were following was Donald Trump, and the people whose orders they were following were Roger Stone and Alex Jones and Michael Flynn. Those are the people who should be under investigation. And as far as I know, none of them are being investigated right now.
Absolutely. And the Senate's not allowing us to look at the factors that led to this thing. What were the influencing things, as again, we're going to get into here in a little bit, but that is important stuff. Like you said, yeah, they're arresting the foot soldiers. We don't, yeah, fine. But that's not, those guys didn't cause the thing. They didn't do it on their own. They did it with guidance and with planning and with larger societal influences like Fox News and QAnon and OAN and all these things that were fueled by Trumpism and whoever is behind Trump. And that's what they're continuing to sort of shield us from. And that's the truth we need, because if we don't figure it out now, we got one shot. We got now until the midterms, and then it's all over. And obviously, I think the public feels like things just turned in kind of a worse direction. And, this week with the infrastructure bill, falling apart this afternoon and stuff. So,
I mean, it's time. I've said this for a while in the show. It's just time to move past the Republicans. They're not going to change. There's no indication of changing. They're not going to change. They're just eating time, and we don't have time, as you point out. There is a precious amount of room between now and next November, and we need to get a lot done. And this doesn't look like they're going to move us in the right direction. I did want to say so much more about this, but let's move on because we've got so much else to do. So I think happening tonight, dinner with the Queen. It's Joe Biden's dinner at Buckingham Palace. I think it's Buckingham Palace with the Queen. This is a pretty highly anticipated dinner. Just a reminder that the Queen remains a head of state, a very important head of state. And what he has been doing in the G7 meeting that they've been having, and now this dinner with the Queen, and what he'll be carrying on doing as he heads into Russia is also into the Russia summit in Geneva, is to reaffirm democracies around the world. And I think that this is people might not be paying as much attention to how important this tour of Europe is, but this really is going to be a test of how important America still is on the world stage, and how much of a full-throated defense all these leaders of these countries want to put out there. So it'll be interesting to get the signals after tonight's dinner about how the Queen was with all of that. She's certainly very, very smart and certainly knows her way around politics. So it'll be interesting to see what she has to say.
Fascinating. It'll be fascinating. And it's a fascinating, I mean, just think of the amount of people, like the amount of, how many American presidents has she been in this position with, going back to Kennedy,
Do you watch The Crown?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of. That's why I said that. I'm thinking of these scenes when she's all nervous about meeting Jackie, and John Kennedy.
I didn't see that. That's great. I was watching some of it last night, and she had just met Margaret Thatcher. I'm always not in the right order here, but she just met Margaret Thatcher in that meeting, and she had, I think, picked all the this cabinet secretaries correctly that Margaret Thatcher was going to choose. And I was like, that is an impressive feat, and does tell you a lot about how switched on she is about the politics that are happening in her country. So I, like you, I'm going to be fascinated by finding out what they say around that. And basically, I just love to be a fly on the wall in that conversation. Yeah, it would be really interesting. So let's move on, because coming up next, we're going to go into the case against Roger Stone, and we'll be joined by one of our Twitter followers, I guess is what you call him. Joe Dempsey will be joining us to help us identify exactly some of the big cases that have been flowing out. And I'm speaking a lot because I'm trying to find a animation. Here it is. We'll be right back after this break and with the case against Roger Stone. Now that summer is almost here and COVID is almost gone, this may be a good time to get some things off your to-do list, like maybe getting life insurance. My mom is really good with finances, and she's always telling me, what about life insurance? It's so important. And I can tell you that Policy Genius is a great place to get life insurance, because you can compare quotes from over a dozen top insurers all in one place. Why compare? Well, you can save as much as 50% or more of life insurance by comparing those quotes, and you could save $1,300 or more per year on life insurance by using Policy Genius to compare those policies for you. The licensed experts at Policy Genius work for you, not the insurance companies, so you can trust them to help you navigate every step of the shopping and buying process. That kind of service has earned Policy Genius a 5-star rating across thousands of reviews on Trustpilot and Google. This is how it works. Getting started is really easy. First, you head to policygenius.com, and in minutes, you can work out how much life insurance coverage you need and compare personalized quotes to find your best price. When you're ready to apply, the Policy Genius team will handle all the paperwork and scheduling for you. Policy Genius never sells your information to other companies, and that means you don't have to worry about your privacy, and they don't add extra fees. Policy Genius. Head to policygenius.com to get started right now. Policy Genius. When it comes to insurance, it's nice to get it right. And we're back on Narrative Live. It's Countdown Tuesdays, and it's not Dinner with the Queen. We're going to be talking about Roger Stone. Let me change that out. Noel Casler is here with us, and Roger Stone had an interest. You know what they say about Roger Stone? I think it was at the New Republic, described him as the cockroach of U.S. politics. And he really is. And the reason, obviously, for that is because he's impossible to destroy. He's like, you can't kill a cockroach. It's really hard to get rid of Roger Stone. He's been around, all the way to the Nixon era for sure. And then he hung around during Ronald Reagan. He made friends with Donald Trump back then, and then has been around dirtying politics ever since. Do you know him?
God, no. I mean, I know a lot of people who know him. He went to high school about 4 miles from where I'm sitting right now. He got out in the early 70s and got into local politics, and obviously started, Stone, Manafort, and Black in the 70s, and became, the lobbyist to Idi Amin and Ferdinand Marcos and all kinds of other lovely people. Some relatives of mine he's harassed and recorded who worked as journalists and stuff. He's a fixture on the Upper East Side. I know Sam Nunberg, who was his aide de camp and his mentee and his coke buddy, but I don't know Roger. He lived up in Harlem too, which is surprising. He would live in Harlem. Yeah.
Interesting.
That's where his apartment was. Yep.
Interesting. We're going to learn a lot about him today. And we're joined by Joe Dempsey. Joe is one of our Twitter followers and a brilliant researcher. Everyone should follow Joe's Twitter feed. What is your handle, Joe?
It's at Dempsey2.
At Dempsey2. Seriously, it's one of the most accurate, interesting feeds out there. Joe, thanks for joining us. We really appreciate you being here. You've been scouring all these indictment case documents that have been coming out. And there was one today. I don't know if you got caught up on that, involving. Okay, well, we'll leave that out. But there's certainly a lot going on in this case regarding January the 6th. And what we're going to do today, with your help, is track back exactly what Roger Stone was doing on those days between the 5th and the 6th. But before we do that, there was a couple of important dates that happened way earlier. And the one that you always point out to is December the 18th, if I'm not mistaken. There was a rally that took place in D.C. that turned out quite violent, actually. And then on the next day, there was a meeting that took place in the White House. This was a famous meeting that was written about in Axios. Tell us a little bit about what happened in that meeting.
A lot happened in that meeting. December 18th. Thanks for having me, Zev. I appreciate it.
Great to have you here.
On December 18th, there was a meeting with a number of people in the White House. There was Michael Flynn was there, Sidney Powell were there. A lot of people were sort of arguing to Trump. I remember distinctly Mike Flynn saying, we need fighters. We need fighters. On the phone was Rudy Giuliani. There was just a lot of people sort of trying to convince Trump that they needed fighters. Sidney Powell was in that meeting, and if I recall correctly, she was asking for access to voting machines for some reason. So December 18th was a pretty pivotal time, I would say, in the White House.
And it's at that meeting that they sort of came up with this initial draft of this idea that they were going to do the martial law idea. It had been floated around before, but certainly it was at this meeting where they got some sort of consensus around this idea that on January the 6th, they began to think about that date as a possible date to try and do this insurrection, and also institute martial law, which would allow them to then have these recounts of the elections in various states. Now, the way I see it, the breakdown has always been like this. Roger Stone has been the guy who raised the militia, and we can see that through his association with the Proud Boys and also the Oath Keepers. Alex Jones was the guy in charge of the propaganda, the Ministry of Propaganda, if you will. Over months, he was inciting people to do exactly what they did on January the 6th, and especially on his channel InfoWars, and there's a lot of his disciples that were involved in the event. And then Michael Flynn, who we know is a disgraced general who has gone completely bonkers. He's been recruiting people using the QAnon platform. So those were the three main people who were building the narrative and inciting people to get to January the 6th. And then, of course, Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell were raising all those court cases, all the recounts and all these challenges to the votes, all of which was really about setting the lie that we now are still facing today, because it obviously did take that Donald Trump won the election in November and not Joe Biden. So that's I think that anyone disagree with that? I don't know. That's my opinion. That's an opinion. I don't have any details around whether these guys did. Well, we have some details, but we don't have absolute confirmation because there's no indictments. There's nothing out there that's even that's suggesting that Roger Stone was involved in doing all of this. And yet, I think today we'll be able to prove that he certainly was in the room while it was happening, before and after while it was happening, and he had associations with each of both the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys.
I think too, Zev, it's important to understand that there was actually White House counsel in that meeting on December 18th as well. So it'd be interesting to maybe have some conversations with those people who were there. It
would be interesting to see that. Absolutely.
That's also when Bill Barr announced his resignation, I believe, was right around the time of this meeting. So Bill Barr got word of this and was like, yo, I'm out of here before y'all try this.
Exactly, because it's so crazy. And that's why he left a few weeks earlier than he should have.
And the Stop the Steal event was announced on December 19th. Right. It was the day after the meeting.
Right. Interesting. Now, originally, the first time we actually heard the Stop the Steal idea, the first time Roger Stone began to throw this around was September 10th, as early as September 10th. He went on Alex Jones's InfoWar, and he began telling people then that this was where they were sort of heading, or at least hinting that that's where they were heading. There are two big cases that are developing in the Department of Justice. There's a conspiracy case against the Oath Keepers and a conspiracy case against the Proud Boys. It seems to me that both of these are going to lead up to perhaps Roger Stone, because we can identify now that Roger Stone had involvement with both the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys. And not only can we identify it because we have information, we can identify it because there's plenty of video to go around to show us that. So let's go to January the 5th. January 5th is a good place to start. And this is when Roger Stone, still staying at the Willard Hotel, that's where he was staying, just next to the White House, the Intercontinental over there. And he is at the Supreme Court. He does this big speech on the Supreme Court. And then while he's there, he's being secured by the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers. They've been doing this with him for a while. They've been providing security for him and other members of Congress. And I am getting to just to this. Here we go. Oh, give me a second while I just set this up. But if Noel, if you want to jump in here with anything, please do, and then I'll be there in a second while
I think you bring back a lot of memories with the Willard Hotel. Like that's basically, it's almost like staying at the White House. And I wonder who else was staying there. The My Pillow guy, I believe, was involved with this. In this meeting at the White House. I think that's where he walked in with a piece of paper that said martial law on it, that the photographers were able to zoom in on.
Right. I think yes. I think you're right. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So you got these meetings at the White House, and then you have these ancillary meetings at the Willard Hotel, at Trump's hotel in his private suite and stuff. So it would be interesting how these guys were like coordinating their stories before they were going to present it to the boss, right? Because those would be the guys that were meeting with the Proud Boys, even though one of them did get a tour of the White House one of those Saturday mornings in December. It was Roger and these other guys that were probably sitting around, with the Proud Boys at the old Ebbett Grill at the bar at night or wherever it is. All these places are right there next to the White House, and sort of downloading what the action plan would be.
I think so. There were 50 people staying there that were part of this entourage. So it certainly gives you an idea of how that was sort of ground zero for them.
Right. And it's not cheap to stay there. Oh, no, that's the other point. Somebody was funding this stuff. If you're staying in the Willard Hotel, like, you got some bucks. So you're talking.
I actually did a search on this yesterday, and I think it was like $400 a night to stay there, because it's around the corner from the White House. You could basically walk to the White House.
It's essentially kind of is the White House in terms of like the security perimeter,
So let's go back to January the 5th, and we're going to take a look at some tape of, this is tape from the New York Times. They were able to identify many of these Oath Keepers, both helping with security in a golf cart that as Roger Stone was driving around, but then also finding the same faces on January the 6th. So here's some of this tape as we look at it. Now, the guy that's sort of cut out of frame there, number 3, his name is Robert Menudo. We'll tell you about him in a second.
God bless you, Mr.
And there you go. There's more Oath Keepers there. And pay attention to the guy at the very end there in the back of that cart, because he's coming up as an important person in the next few minutes as we break down what happened on that day. So clearly, the Oath Keepers who were part of the event on... let me just drop something here to stop that. One of these days, okay. There we go. So clearly, the Oath Keepers who were providing security for Roger Stone on both the 5th and the 6th on a couple of occasions, and we've shown you some evidence of the first one, were also involved in the insurrection. There's absolute videotape of this. But also in 2 of their cases, if not more, you'll have to correct me, Joe, the Oath Keepers have been indicted. These particular Oath Keepers that were hanging around with Roger Stone, providing him security, they've been indicted. And one of them is Robert Menudo. The other one is James, right? Jason James, right?
Joshua James.
Joshua James, okay, sorry.
Joshua James and Robert Menudo.
So tell us about Robert Menudo first, and tell us about, he's been indicted as part of this conspiracy, and is there anything specifically notable about Robert Menudo as we put up these pictures?
So I don't know anything specifically notable. I'm not an investigator. The first thing that I did was say, let me go to the indictments, because from the indictment perspective, that's what the government is telling you that they can prove. Mm-hmm. So it's not somebody's, take on it or somebody's opinion. It's literally what the government is telling you that they can prove. So in the first indictment, you can see some communications back and forth with folks, and some of the names are present in those communications. And then in superseding indictments that came later, so I think we're now on our 4th superseding indictment in this particular conspiracy case, there's a person 5. Right. In one of the earlier indictments, that person 5 was actually named Robert Menudo.
Right.
So at some point, they went from actually naming him in the indictment to now just calling him person 5.
Which is an indication possibly that he might be cooperating, right? I mean, that's at least feeling like what that could be about. Who knows?
It's possible. It's possible. I don't want to speculate, but it's possible that that's what that could mean. There are some other redactions from people that we did know before. So for instance, person 2 was named in an earlier indictment, but now is not. They're literally named person 2.
So what you're seeing now is on screen. Sorry, do you finish that thought, please? Sorry.
It's interesting to see how these superseding indictments sort of evolve over time. I mean, right now, I believe that the first indictment had maybe 5 to 6 names. The superseding indictment is now talking about a person 20. So this is a larger indictment, and it's one that we should watch.
Okay, so we'll definitely keep an eye out as they expand the number of people indicted. By the way, this is Menudo on his way on a golf cart to the insurrection on the 6th, saying things like, it's going down, guys. It's literally going down right now. Patriots storming the Capitol building. Fucking war in the streets right now. Word they got in the building. Let's go. As he and his buddies climb into that same golf cart that was carrying Roger Stone and headed down to the insurrection to storm the Capitol. These 2 pictures, by the way, the one on the right there is Robert Menudo as he is storming the insurrection in that video we just saw. The one on the left is, we believe, Robert Menudo from the morning of January the 6th. So the next time we see Robert Menudo with Roger Stone will be on the morning of the 6th outside the Willard Hotel. Keep that in mind, because we're building a whole collection of people for you to identify around Roger Stone on the morning of the 6th. Before we get there, let's get to, sorry, go ahead. I'm watching time a little bit here, but go ahead.
Sorry, another thing that's in the indictments is you can see the interactions between people. So you can see things where it says person 5 called person 1, and there was a phone call that lasted 1:11 seconds, or a phone call that lasted 52 seconds. So as you start to put those things together, and we start to sort of backfill in the names from person 1 or person 10 or person 5, whatever those happen to be, you can start to see the communications between, who's in charge and who's not, what type of, the timing of some of these communications is important. Because if you look at the entirety of the timeline and you start to backfill it in with some of the communications that these people are having, it kind of starts to tell a story.
It absolutely does. That's a really good point about the phone calls. Very, very significant point. The night of the 5th, there was a big rally that took place. Do you know where it took place? Was the Freedom Plaza, or was it somewhere
Freedom
else?
Plaza, I believe.
Yeah. And there was a moment where Roger Stone came in there with two of the Proud Boys, two significant Proud Boys. One of the Proud Boys that was with him was Tario, who was the basic leader of the Proud Boys. And the other one is a guy named Nordine. I'm going to play you the tape. They look a little bit less than sober to me, a little bit. I don't know. Maybe you can help me identify what they might be looking like here. But they look certainly very happy to see the crowd. And I'm going to play it to you from two different directions. One side, you'll see someone is shooting this from the audience. There's an InfoWars personality, if you know what those are. They exist, unfortunately. And then we will see Roger Stone from behind, and you'll see Nordine and Tario. So let's throw these up, and I'll actually leave us up in boxes here so we can talk, because it does go on a little bit, and so we should be able to talk as we do that. Here we go.
I got it. No, I've got it right here. I don't be too close.
It's actually really interesting what he says here about the Supreme Court.
And this is December 11th, so this is a month before.
Oh, this is the month before? Okay.
Yeah. If you recall, on January 4th, Enrique Tarrio was told to stay out of Washington.
Sorry, say that again?
On January 4th, Enrique Tarrio, I believe, was arrested. And as part of that, he was told to stay away from Washington.
Correct.
So
you are right. I've actually misidentified this, unfortunately. So, okay. But there was a rally similar to this. Then we won't play the whole thing in that case. Thank you for that. So there was a rally similar to this, and there is video of that. I assume this was that video. So silly of me. But on that night, at that rally in Freedom Plaza, I think it's a rally when Alex Jones was quite vehemently addressing the crowd and telling them that they were going to, fight back for all the years that he'd been telling them that he was right and the globalists were wrong. It's on that night that the Proud Keepers and the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers got to meet each other, at least for sure. We know that they were all at that rally. And that's significant because up until now, what we've seen is sort of different factions. We've seen the Proud Boys develop as their own indictment and the Oath Keepers develop as their own indictment. So the fact that they had an opportunity to meet on the night of the 5th is very significant.
Yeah, I think it's what you're saying about, the two separate indictments. It really is in two separate paths, if you will. You've got one side where, you have that Oath Keepers and the guarding and all the different contacts that they've had. From the Proud Boys side, you can actually see the communications even further and what they actually did in terms of the timing of who went first and how it sort of kicked off. There's footage of people sort of going to some of the higher ups in the Proud Boys organization and whispering in their ear sort of before things kicked off around 12:51.
On January the 6th, right?
On January the 6th, that's right.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's definitely, it's interesting that we certainly see them separately for a long time, and we certainly see them around Roger Stone separately. But the fact that they had an opportunity to gather on the 5th, and I know journalists like Seth Abramson have got a much more detailed idea or suggestion of an idea of what happened on the 5th. I can't confirm those details, unfortunately, but I do know that they were all present at the Freedom Plaza. There was a lot of moving back and forth, and we can put a lot of these same Proud Boy people and the Oath Keepers in the same place at Freedom Plaza, riling the crowds up.
And speeches that were occurring that day on January 5th at that rally also included people who were at the White House meeting on December 18th. Right. So one of the people who was in there on December 18th was a guy named Patrick Byrne. And in that meeting, according to Axios, he also gave a speech the night before on January 5th.
And what have you described him as, a Butina enthusiast? Is that?
Yeah. I call him a Maria Butina enthusiast.
Yes,
because if you look at Volume 5, the Senate report of Volume 5, he's named in there along with Maria Butina. There's some interesting reading in that.
Wow. So, no, I know there's a lot of information here, but if you're going to jump in and just freewheel any of that, it's interesting.
It's just so fascinating. You know, you threw me off with Maria Bettina. I had an ex who looked just like her, so it freaks me out every time I see her. But I understand his enthusiasm. You know, not for the content, but she was, you know, Red Sparrow, like, you know, whatever. Like, you can see why they sent her to DC. Man, she starts flirting with these guys at these gun shows. You know, and you can see the larger like tentacles of this operation and how it really took place over a few years. You know, with QAnon, with 8chan, with all this kind of stuff, and then they come together. You know, with the president saying, "Come January 6th, it's gonna be wild." You know, and you can see them egging each other on. And like, people forget, like Gavin McInnes, who started the Proud Boys, is from, you know, he's from like, where is it? Like right southern Westchester, Merrimack. You know, the guy lives in the suburbs of Westchester. You know, it's like they're feeding this toxic masculinity. You know, they have the T-shirts, "We fight, we F," you know, and we something else, right? Like, you know, so that video you showed shows that kind of frat boy thing, you know, that they were sort of like ginning up, and that stuff feeds on itself. You know, these guys think they were heroes. They think they were patriots. And by having that meeting at the White House and then having people like Roger Stone and Mike Flynn, who was a general, you know, so these guys feel like they're taking their orders. You know, these guys that have this military cosplay baked into their whole thing there with their buddies now feel like they're taking orders. And that goes a long way to show why they did what they did on January 6th, because they thought they were doing the right thing. Right. You know, and you see all their interactions with actual cops. They're kind of like, "What are you guys doing? We're the good guys. We're here to, like, you know, get Mike Pence, because that's what Trump wants us to do. Like, why are you tear gassing us?" Like,
exactly,
you know,
exactly. You're not following the orders that the president is giving us.
I mean, it was almost like they've been deputized. You know, they're almost like, "Look, here's my badge." You know, when I'll just say, when I worked on both Barack Obama's inaugurations, right? And they gave me this little pin. Like, the Secret Service gave me the pin. And once I had that pin, I was walking around because I could get through any door. You know, it was like the inner sanctum. And I felt like I could arrest people with that pin.
Probably
you know?
But
the point, and they would laugh at me, the Secret Service guys. I'm like, "What does this get me?" They're like, "Nothing, dude." Like, but my point is, when you feel like you've been deputized, when you feel like you're acting in an official capacity, it has a very strong effect, like an intoxicating effect on your ego.
In fact, when you're there in lanyards that said VIP, and you know, VIP for what?
My point exactly.
Yeah, I mean, and so let's take a look at some of the video then on January the 6th. So we're outside the Willard Hotel. You know, throughout the entire investigation, Roger Stone has insisted that he spent his entire time in the room on January the 6th at the Willard, that he never left the grounds of the Willard. That may in fact be true, because he only stood outside the Willard. And let's take a look at some of what happened that day. This is the full 8-minute video, which few people have seen, but you know, there he is outside. A lot of these people you see surrounding him are in fact oath keepers, the ones wearing, I guess they're called them gaiters, or these things that they have on top of their mouths. They're called gaiters. Like that guy right behind him there, who you'll see in a second, is one of the oath keepers. He's in a flannel shirt, I guess, and a cap. And this whole crowd around him is all oath keepers. Even though they don't all look like they're oath keepers, they are oath keepers. Later on in this video, we also see Rudy Giuliani exiting the same hotel. So Rudy was staying at that hotel too. So it's interesting. Conversation between Rudy and Roger would have happened that day. Go ahead.
It's interesting to see, because, you know, people are taking selfies, right? They're trying to get their picture taken with Roger Stone, and that's great. Somebody says, you know, they come back and say, "Hey, you know, can I get a picture? Because I had my mask on in the first one, and I would like one without my mask on." So then the camera kind of turns, and just as the camera turns, you can actually see Rudy going into and being escorted into a black SUV. Yeah, so I don't know if he was staying there or if he was staying at the Trump Hotel, but he was at the Willard in the morning.
I think he was staying there. Wouldn't be surprised me. There's a lot of people. 50 people is what we understand stayed at that hotel before. I'll go full screen as well on this, because it might be more easy to identify for people. It shouldn't restart, but it might. There you go. So there are people taking lots of pictures. When you see Rudy, let us know, because it's interesting to see as they step out. So again, looking for the people wearing the flannel shirt, cap, the gaiters. Those are all people who are believed to be Oath Keepers, and we can identify one or two of them, and we'll do so in a second. But the point is that certainly that morning, the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers were at least suspected of being at the Willard. Certainly the Oath Keepers were all there, as were many of the officials, including Rudy Giuliani and Roger Stone. This glad handing goes on for a while, so I'll just show you quickly.
Can I say something?
Yeah, of course. Please.
You know, this shows you how much celebrity was a part of the whole Trumpism thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, these people like, can I get a selfie with Roger Stone? Like, what do they think? You know, they're like, it's an honor to meet you. What's an honor about meeting him? Like,
Nothing.
what has he done good in his life? The guy has been a reprobate since the 70s. He defended America's enemies. You know, he helped like dictators get lobbying support in Washington, D.C. He's as much a part of dark money and like the bad side of democracy and imperialism as you're ever going to get in this lifetime. But these people have seen him on Alex Jones. They know Trump talks about him. And half of these guys are here just because it's like
Rudy.
Here's Rudy getting into the... There he is right now. Good point. Sorry, go ahead, Noel.
No, it's just like it's like a WrestleMania thing. Like they're coming because they get a selfie, they get access. Meet your favorite star. Come on down Saturday, and you'll get a selfie with Roger Stone. Like it's just insane, you know.
And also, you know, we just actually got a glimpse of Robert Munuda a few seconds ago. I'm sure we'll see him again. Remember the guy we had it on January the 6th, hurling all those abuses at the police at the insurrection. We just saw him a second ago. So I think when they turn the camera to the left, you'll see him again. And then if you look at the little behind there, can you see that woman with the blonde hair? That just behind there, can you see her? She is the the Manhattan Madam. And she is a very key figure in the entire Roger Stone story on the 6th, because she was the person who he spent the whole day with inside the Willard Hotel. And we'll tell you how we know that in just a second, but it's not really thought about. Behind her or next to her, you see there's a tall guy with a beard. You can't really see him because it's kind of a little obscured, but right at the back there by the doors, a tall guy with a beard. Keep him in mind because he is a New York police cop, and we will show you how he relates to both the Manhattan Madam, who's a felon, and the New York police cop and Roger Stone. So they form a big part of the narrative around what Roger Stone was doing that day. I don't know if very much is going to happen in the rest of this video, so I'll pull us back on camera here, but give you maybe one last chance to see. Those are the Oath Keepers on the left. There's the Madam. And then next to the Madam is the cop, right behind her to the right there. All right, I think that's sort of the end of the video. It's interesting stuff.
Yeah, and what's also interesting is that cop that you just said there, he actually pulled something up to his ear at some point, and it's not a telephone. It looks like it has like a, I don't know, like an antenna on it. Yeah.
In fact, I noticed a lot of them had walkie-talkies. Rob Menudo had a walkie-talkie in his vest, and so did the cop.
Which again, I think is important going back to the indictments. If there's communication, what devices were they using to communicate?
Exactly. Do you know them? I don't know why I'm asking you if you know the Manhattan Madam, but I'm curious about whether you know her. No.
He's asked me that before, Joe.
Okay. Right.
He knows I don't know her. You know, I know some people.
You know everybody.
I know some people who worked with her. I know those. You know, I know some like escorts. I know some high class escorts just because of like the area of New York City I lived in and the sort of business I was in and stuff. Yeah. You know, I know some that changed their ways. I know that girl who was in Epstein's house, who Trump groomed when she was a kid. She ended up working in that business, you know, and she still doesn't have her life together because that's what these guys do. You know, they exploit and sell women as a kind of a side business of Trump. But, and NYPD was around for a lot of that stuff too, so it doesn't surprise me that they're down there. I mean, Giuliani and Bernie Carroll, that's about as corrupt a law enforcement duo as this country's ever seen. And all these men are still walking free. You know, back to the earlier point about, you know, I don't want to get back into Merrick Garland, but what better time to really figure out what's going on here for the country, you know?
And you know, too, I mean, I'm sorry to cut you off, though.
No, go.
So one other thing that's important is, remember when Ghislaine Maxwell got arrested? Audrey Strauss was right there pointing her finger at a poster. I don't understand why the DOJ can't do something like that. A lot of this information, I think the difference between, what's in the indictments is publicly available, but that's not announced publicly. So you have to sort of look for it and you have to go and search it out, as opposed to, I don't understand why somebody can't go on television and say something.
I wonder if
Give
Ghislaine
us an
Maxwell
update.
is going to come up at dinner with the Queen tonight. That's
Look,
quite
I
possible.
know.
So let's get back to Kristen Davis here, because she's the Manhattan Madam, and her buddy Sal Greco. There's a photo of them. There's a close-up of him from that video we just saw. She's also well known for, I think, helping Elliot Spitzer end his political career, if I'm not mistaken. So, that's who she is.
There's a story I want to tell you so bad that involves the Willard Hotel and all of that stuff, but I'll save it for another day.
Are you
but
sure?
Man, you
sure?
you just came so close to one of the biggest kind of DC secrets that I got from somebody who knew, who was in a position to know, and it involved the Secret Service, a former
and you're not
president.
Going to tell us?
I can't. It's one of the craziest stories I've ever heard, and it has real world repercussions that involved Elliot Spitzer and that hotel and another administration. And it was insane.
Well, she is part of that story somehow. I don't exactly know what she did around that story, but there you go. Now, she's the person who tells the Daily Mail, the Daily News in New York, that there were literally 50 of us staying at the Willard Hotel. I think all the guys, when things were done, just kind of hang out for a bit, said Davis. Which is interesting, because I didn't think we knew that before, that there were 50 people staying at the same hotel as Roger Stone on January the 6th. While this, if you wanted to have a meeting with some of your friends who might be, wanting to have an insurrection, wanting to storm the Capitol, they would all be in the same hotel. You wouldn't really have to leave your hotel to have a little get together and discuss how you're going to do things. And I think that's a very significant detail that I don't think people fully appreciate. But the most interesting thing about Ms. Davis is that she Instagrammed some footage of herself with Roger Stone from his hotel room. Mostly, I believe, is some sort of cover, but it's damn good video. So here's Kristen Davis live from the Roger Stone suite at the Willard Hotel.
Here we are in Roger Stone's suite, watching the situation on the Capitol unfold. We are safe and sound.
That's your opinion? Because there was this story. You mean that's just that's your opinion? There was a story that said that the DOJ rather, the Department of Defense.
Safe and sound. We are in Roger Stone's suite, watching the situation on the Capitol unfold. We are safe and sound.
That's your opinion? Because there was this story. You mean that's just that's your opinion? There was a story that said that the DOJ rather, the Department of Defense.
Safe and sound. Here we
Safe and sound, just safe and sound. I don't know. You, Noel.
It's mind-boggling. I'm noticing the open beer bottle. I'm thinking about, how does Roger Stone have a suite at the Willard Hotel when he was begging his followers for money for his legal defense? The guy had just gotten pardoned. Like, he said he couldn't afford any of his places after the legal case. Like, again, the Willard Hotel is not your Marriott downtown kind of thing. That is basically, if you're a relative of somebody in the administration, you're staying there, like a relative of the president and stuff. Yeah. The amount of security and the amount of expense and sort of officialdom, for lack of a better word, surrounding that historic hotel is mind-boggling. So to give
50 rooms, even at a discounted rate, it's
right.
A lot of money.
Which is like half the hotel, if not more. I mean, it's not that big a hotel. It's an exclusive hotel. So that's this was an official operation. And Roger Stone is insane. He's a grifter. He's literally out of his mind. He's as crazy as can be. He's as drug-addled as the guy he works for. I know Sam Nunberg. They were cokeheads together. He and Roger and Sam are the guys that came up with the build the wall thing. And that was in a coke-fueled session when Trump was forgetting to be racist at his early rallies. He was just forgetting to rail against immigration and the Mexicans. So they're like, let's give him a talking point so he remembers. Right. And that's where build a wall came from. Those guys snorting.
Words become chants and messages so easily. So build the wall. Stop the steal.
Exactly.
Say
they're marketers,
and
right? That's what I'm saying.
It's interesting, you talk about being using drugs. The Proud Boys describe themselves as being very pro-drug. This is their own description. So certainly it's not, he's surrounding himself with people in terms of protection and security that also, are involved in the world of narcotics. I'm not sure that is quite the message the Republican Party think that they're sending out, but that's what's happening inside the ranks of the Proud Boys. And so there's the madam in the hotel room, and she was staying there with the New York Police Department, Sal Greco, which we identified earlier. And Mr. Greco has been involved in all sorts of things, including with Bernie Carrick. And I don't know what he was doing there. He wasn't there as an official capacity on the 6th. But remember earlier on, I asked you to pay attention to the guy at the back of the golf cart on the day of the 5th. Well, guess who that is? That is Mr. Greco. So certainly he may not have been an official security guard. I don't know how you get anointed that, but he was acting like a security guard while still being a member of the New York Police Department for Roger Stone during a weekend in which included an insurrection. So, put that in wherever and smoke it, because that's pretty wild.
And that's Trump's MO. Keith Schiller, all these guys were NYPD. Keith was on the job when he started working for Trump, and then he was retired NYPD. That's part of this thing. Giuliani, Roger Stone, Trump. You hire rock bands. I know this because I worked with rock bands, right? You hire an ex-cop or a cop who's moonlighting as your security, you're not getting busted for drugs. You're not getting busted for drinking. You're not getting busted for drunk driving. You're not getting busted for bringing girls back to your hotel and you don't want your wife to see or whatever. It gives you an official air of impunity. It makes you sort of above the law because you've bent the law to your will. So a guy like Roger Stone would certainly have NYPD as his protection, especially if he knew what was going to go down that day. Right? Because if they knew there was going to be this big operation, you got a guy who can pull out a badge, because all those guys still carry their badges, and other cops will let them pass when you show your badge. So these guys are smart. And Roger Stone knows if it gets ugly and messy, he's got a guy there who can flash a badge and get him back to the Willard when the S starts to hit the fan on the mall or wherever he was.
Exactly. And who owns these golf carts? Because these are the same golf carts the Oath Keepers, swerving like crazy around police officers, drove to the Capitol insurrection at 2:30 on the afternoon, wanting to join in the insurrection, apparently endangering people's lives. So I'm not sure if they're Rogers or they're hotels, but it certainly might have been rented out to him for that period.
Let me jump in here, okay? Because this is my business. I worked on events for 20 years, all right? You don't get golf carts without renting them from a golf cart company, okay? That's an event thing that you're renting. The Willard doesn't have golf carts that they run out to their guests, okay? It's at 15th and Pennsylvania Avenue, You don't need a golf cart. It's the middle of a city. So that was planned infrastructure. That requires a production coordinator, a site coordinator. This was a planned operation. This was 100%. A planned event. And a golf cart, like when I work on the Super Bowl, like I did for 15 years, we get a handful of golf carts and I use it to bring prints out on the field or whatever. Right. You use it in these big events where you're going to have crowds to get through those crowds, to have your own lanes and your own quick exits, and you put security on your golf cart. When we do the Super Bowl, it's DEA agents. That's who provides security at the Super Bowl, right? So again, to my earlier point, they were getting official ways to make sure they could get around unencumbered by security if there was a crackdown, right? And quick exits.
That's such amazing insight that you're providing us there, because people don't know this world, but you're absolutely right. It takes a lot to get these permits. It's not easy. The entire permit for the entire event, which we'll go through in just a second, was quite complicated. But just the golf carts, and to be able to drive those golf carts down the mall all the way to the Capitol. I mean, I don't know how you would get access to that. It just seems astonishing that would be allowed to happen, unless you happen to have been organizing an event, which they were, on the east side of the Capitol building. So that's Sal Greco, by the way, at the back of this golf cart the day before a New York Police Department cop. He's under investigation, but he still has his job. And he's a good friend of the Manhattan Madam, who spent the entire day with Roger Stone on the 6th in their hotel room, where another 50 people involved in the insurrection were maybe staying. So interesting. Now, there's so much more I can do, and I'm also watching the time because we are out of time. But I'm going to just do a couple of quick things that are worth mentioning. But Joe, why don't you jump in with your thoughts, and then we'll find out how to get as much of this in as possible.
Yeah, I think, interesting what Noel's saying about, the production event and how much planning goes into it. And the golf carts were available. The picture that you're showing right now is from January 5th. Those same golf carts were there for January 6th. So somebody had to plan and rent those for a number of days. They weren't just, sort of laying around. I don't know if there's a golf course around that area.
Right.
There's no golf course. I worked on the Kennedy Center Honors. Okay, I started my career in D.C. I lived down there. That's where I started in TV in 1993. I've done presidential inaugurations. I've done the Christmas tree lightings at the White House. I've done all that shit. You need to do a lot of planning to get a golf cart delivered to you in D.C. And you need to coordinate with, like, okay, Roger Stone's going to need one. Mike Flynn's going to need one. It's that's why you need a congressional investigation. You need people to say who gave, Roger Stone a golf cart, who ordered that golf cart, who knew he would need one that day. You need to get into the mechanics of this thing, because this didn't happen by happenstance.
Absolutely not. Yeah. I mean, the whole thing was so organized. Go ahead, Joe.
And the indictments are only telling us so much. They're not telling us that information. They're not telling us, who got the permits for January 6th. And we know who got the permits. They're, again, publicly available. Same thing for the 5th. I think, if you look at some of the golf carts, one of the golf carts in the front had a number on it and like a piece of paper. And the paper said something like 80% provided by 80%. And if you look at what happened on the speakers from January 5th, one of the speakers from that production was from this group 80%.
Oh,
so I don't know if there's that tie into the golf carts.
It's all connected.
But
I'll tell you one thing: the organization that got the permits on that day were basically this organization called Women for Trump, and they were an interesting organization because they have a lot of members in Women for Trump were actually part of the Trump campaign. In fact, here's a little chart of all the people who were involved in getting that permit that day. It involves, people like, what's the name here? I'm just looking for Maggie Mulvaney, who's Nick Mulvaney's daughter, I believe. And I guess the Carolyn Wren, who is the assistant to Donald Trump's girlfriend, Donald Trump Jr.'s girlfriend. From Fox News. His name escapes me right now, but you guys will know him. And also the former Trump campaign director of finance is part of this group. So they were the ones who got the permit for January 6th. But the most interesting thing about that day and about the organization Women for Trump, and I'm just going to try to find it for us here, is that it is partly run by Roger Stone's ex-wife, Ann Stone. So she is a part, I guess, I don't say owner because she just runs the thing, with Amy Kramer, who's the Women for Trump president, a former Tea Partier. The two of them actually run the Women for Trump. So let me just pull up the money and how it flows here, because I am trying to find it while I'm talking, so I apologize for stumbling a little bit. But there's Ann Stone. Sorry, Ann Stone. There she is, a picture of her. This is the previous wife, not the current swinging wife that he has as wife. And the money into Women for Trump essentially came out of Preserve America PAC, which is a Sheldon Adelson thing. It flowed into the 2020 campaign. $2.7 million was paid to the organization towards the end of the Trump campaign. And basically some of that was paid to set up the Stop the Steal event. So that's how the Stop the Steal event got funded. But it's interesting that there again is Roger Stone's kin. So, it just doesn't stop. It doesn't stop. Another connection with Roger Stone. In fact, the more you look at the events of January the 6th, Roger Stone is in the middle of all of that. He's connected to Donald Trump, obviously. He's connected to Women for Trump through Ann Stone. He's connected to InfoWars because he was an InfoWars contributor for a long time. He knows Alex Jones really well. We just showed you how he's connected to the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys. And also, interestingly, when you do a big search and big analysis around Q, the one word that comes out the most when you do a social media analysis around Q is the word Roger. So every single of the main components of January the 6th, the people who came together to overthrow the government of the United States are somehow connected to Roger Stone. And as of today, there's no indictments, there's no investigation into any of this regarding Roger Stone in particular that we know of.
That we know of.
Right.
Yeah, that we know of.
Go ahead,
Can I
Noel.
make
Yeah.
one more point and I'll shut up for the
No,
show?
please.
Also,
as much as you
in
want.
concerning that, Roger Stone, it was Roger Stone who had the guy who the internet guy that he then gave to the 8chan guys, the dudes that hosted the whole QAnon conspiracy. And this guy had the power to elevate a site. He could take any tweet, anybody's Twitter handle, and make it the most popular Twitter handle on Twitter, right? That was Roger Stone's guy, right? He gave him to this, this Ron dude, whose father and son that were running the 8chan site over in the Philippines, right? Roger Stone gave him this guy, and that's what gave QAnon such a big platform.
Let's not forget WikiLeaks. Let's not forget that he was also WikiLeaks. The contact to WikiLeaks was Roger Stone. I mean, he's not just an accidental player in any of the Trump presidency. He's an active participant, if not the key organizer of so much of the events.
Yeah, of the last 30 years, if you really want to look at it. But certainly in terms of Trumpism, that's what I said. From build the wall to stop the steal. That's all Roger Stone. That's what he does. He's the man in the shadows, except this time he's a Batman villain and he doesn't want to be in the shadows. He wants to be dancing with his Nixon tattoo on his back and hanging out with the Manhattan Madam in his suite. And that's why he was pardoned. He had a role, Trump pardoned him so he could do what he did on January 5th and 6th.
In fact, that's a very good point to underline. His pardon comes in at like December 25th or thereafter, just in time for him to do the Stop the Steal event. I mean, it's not coincidental, obviously. In fact, after he was pardoned, he phoned Donald Trump, and they had a very big conversation how they need to mobilize against the fact that the election was stolen from Donald Trump. So it was almost like marching orders for them to go. Hey, speaking of having to go, we have taken everyone's time for way too long this evening. Joe, thank you so much for joining us. Tell us again, Joe Dempsey, how they can find you on Twitter. I'm at Dempsey2. Okay. DEMPSEYTWO. Must follow feed. It's really always a lot of interesting information. Noel Casler can be found on the Noel Casler podcast, available wherever you get your podcast. And it's also a must listen to. Really, really great stuff from Noel. And it drops what day of the week?
It drops on Monday. And folks can check out the Narrative podcast. If you weren't watching this or you found it interesting, tell your friends about it. We discussed a lot tonight. Listen to it again, Good point. Yeah, please, if you actually, I always forget to say this, but for those viewers who like the show, but also watch the podcast or listen to the podcast, there's an audio feed and a video podcast. Please go to your podcast player and subscribe and download those things, because that really helps in the numbers that we get. So we'll appreciate all of that. We appreciate your viewing tonight, as we always do on Narrative. We'll be back on Friday with the after show. Thanks for watching Countdown Tuesdays. Good night, everybody. Narrative is funded by viewers like you. Support our independent journalism at patreon.com/narrative.